It is indeed an honor and a privilege for me to be here to welcome you all to the inauguration of the Jindal Society for Modern Indian Histories. We have an absolutely fascinating discussion and an even better panel lined up for you this evening. And I would like to request you to join me in welcoming Mr. Kapil Sibal, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, former Union Minister, a name that needs no introduction. Thank you so much for being with us, dear sir. Your commitment to India's constitutional values and your endeavor to set the record straight whenever attempts have been made to distort our history are truly very appreciable, and we are very, very grateful to you for being here. I would now like to call upon the Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Raj Kumar, to make his inaugural remarks.
All right. Very good evening to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this JGU International Academy here in Delhi, where OP Jindal Global University has a presence. It's a very special day for a number of reasons. To begin with, this is an extraordinarily significant initiative of our students. I must make a confession that this entire event and initiative is led by our students. So I want to extend my heartiest congratulations to our students who chose it appropriate to establish the Jindal Society for Modern Indian Histories at a time when almost 4 out of 5 seminars that happen in this country and other parts of the world is connected to artificial intelligence and robotics and machine learning and all related aspects of it. To be able to connect to the study of humanities, to be able to recognize the importance of studying history and its implications for understanding the foundations of both our democracy, but also the constitutional values. It speaks volumes about the commitment and the contextual recognition that these issues matter to us. So I want to take this moment to congratulate all our students. The society itself is led by Baba Sayan Bajaj and his colleagues, several of whom are present here. Congratulations to each one of you. I also want to extend a warm welcome to an extraordinarily inspiring lawyer of our country, Mr. Kapil Sibal. Mr. Kapil Sibal is actually somebody who doesn't need any introduction, not only to the legal world, but also even beyond. But he has never been to our campus. So I must say that it's a very, very special occasion for us to host him here at our Delhi facility. But even more significant for me personally is that long before I had the opportunity to actually persuade Mr. Naveen Jindal to make a commitment towards establishing this university, I had the privilege to discuss this idea of this university with Mr. Sibal when I was teaching in Hong Kong. And at a very early stage, he encouraged me and supported the idea long before the idea came into fruition. So I want to thank him and appreciate his far-sighted vision then. Later, of course, he also, for some people you may not be aware, he was also the Union Minister for Education. It was when the ministry was called the Human Resource Development. During that time also, I had the privilege to meet him. And during all those interactions, he was deeply conscious of the need to promote excellence in higher education, building institutions of world-class standards, and the need for liberalizing the regulatory environment and ecosystem for higher education. All of that resonated so well in our imagination. So today, after 17 years of our journey, I'm so happy to welcome Mr. Sibal amidst us. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you for recognizing the need for these conversations to happen at the time in which we are here. I also want to recognize the fact that we will have very shortly 2 other individuals, the noted historian and author, Mr. William Dalrymple. We look forward to hosting him soon. And of course, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who is already on his way and should be here soon. I'm also deeply grateful to 2 of my colleagues, Professor Abhishek Rana, as well as Professor Arup Chatterjee, both of whom have mentored our students, and they will, especially Arup, will be moderating the panel discussion, which will follow shortly. What I thought I will do very quickly, as the other speakers are on their way, I want to briefly introduce the university to this audience, some of whom may not be aware of who we are. So our journey began in the year, so this is our journey. This was the year 2008. Before this journey began, I had the privilege to study in Delhi University and then at Oxford and Harvard. In 1998, I had the privilege to be a student at Oxford and dreamt about the idea of building a university in India. Spent the next several years, initially as a student at Oxford and Harvard, later as a lawyer in New York, and then as a professor in Japan and Hong Kong. And during those years, I wrote a paper entitled Establishing India's First Global University. Got to meet with an Indian benefactor named Naveen Jindal in the year 2006. Spent a year persuading Mr. Jindal to do three things. One, to make a substantial financial commitment. Second, to do it in a not-for-profit manner. And third, to let me have the academic freedom and autonomy and independence to build a world-class university in India, starting with the world-class law school. By late 2007, Mr. Jindal agreed to all of it, invited me to move to India. Jan 2008, I moved to India. January to April 2008, I was trying to understand India myself as I was returning to India after a decade of living abroad. By April 2008, I quit my job in Hong Kong and we began the process of institution building from scratch. Land acquisition, formulation of curriculum, course structure, program development, faculty recruitment plan, student admissions process, hiring of architects, construction engineers, contractors, and persuading the government of Haryana to pass a new legislation to establish the first private university in the state of Haryana. As late as 27th January 2009, the law was passed, but just before that, we were right here just dreaming about the idea of building a university. I had an office right there in the porta cabin, and we were dreaming big. We had unlimited supply of Jindal steel and great ideas. All right, that's our journey. We began in a very modest manner with just a little over 100 students and 20 faculty members and staff and 49 acres of land and 200,000 square feet of built-up space. Today, after 17 years, we have become a multidisciplinary university with more than 16,000 students, literally from 160 plus countries and regions, 4,000 faculty members and staff from more than 50 countries, and 100 acres of land and 5 million square feet of built-up space. Intellectually, we have grown significantly. We started with a law school in 2009, then we built a business school, a school of international affairs, a school of government and public policy, a school of liberal arts and humanities, banking and finance, journalism and communication, art and design, environment and sustainability, psychology and counseling, languages and literature, and public health and human development. Our journey also led to expansion of our university with 6 institutes in various disciplines, all of which is part of this ecosystem of higher education within the campus. We are a fully residential university. More than 10,000 students live on campus out of the 16,000 students. The rest of the 6,000 are part of our 100% online degree programs where they are from different parts of the world. We are a global university and that's part of our DNA. Our middle name is global and we take that very seriously. We have students, of course, from 160 plus countries. We have international collaborations and partnerships with more than 80 countries where 600 plus universities are part of institutions. Our faculty members, as I mentioned, come from more than 50 countries in the world, and these are full-time residential faculty. We have international collaborations with every part of the world. There is not a single part of the world, whether it is North America, South America, Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, of course, Europe, Middle East, all of them, we have collaborations, partnerships, and that has led to our students going there and they coming. There is only one part of the world where we don't have any collaborations, but we work with pretty much every part of the world. Our students end up going to different parts of the world. Almost 1,000 students now go around the world for various short-term study abroad programs, immersion programs, student exchange programs, dual degree programs, as well as joint degree programs. These are some of our partner institutions where our students go for higher studies. I'm not even talking about graduates going for higher studies, but I'm talking about our own students going for programs that we have created for them. We also host 1,000 students from abroad on our campus, and they also come from different parts of the world, and they come from universities around the world, and that is part of our effort to essentially bring the world to India and take India to the world. We are a very interdisciplinary university, something that we are very conscious of, and I know that Mr. Sibal spoke about it when he was education minister, where the idea is that regardless of whichever school or program you belong to, You have an opportunity to study and take courses in other schools and programs, and that is part of our effort to create an intellectually vibrant environment. Our students cross-register courses across all schools and programs, and they are not limited by the opportunities that their own enrolled courses and schools provide them for. We are a very diverse institution. More than 50% of our students are women, more than 55% of our faculty members are women, and more than 50% of our students are studying with some form of scholarship or the other, which has created an opportunity for both accessibility as well as equity in the process of our education. We have grown significantly as a residential community. Our growth has resulted in creating campus ecosystems. We've also moved into online and blended learning. In the last 5 years, since 2020, we have had more than 12,000 learners, again coming from more than 160 countries, 6,000 of them pursuing online education programs. Our faculty members have been actively working in research and publications. We have more than 60 research centers. Our faculty members have produced more than 250 plus books, but also because of their academic and scholarly work in Scopus Index journals, our citations are quite significant. All right, I'll quickly move into some of our aspects. Of course, this is our Chancellor, Mr. Jindal. These are all our convocations. I'm going to come to the end of this presentation, which is, that's our infrastructure, and I will leave you to come to campus and see it. And that's the last slide I want to show you, which is basically our commitment to sustainable development. More than 50% of our campus is green cover. And I must say that most recently, yesterday, we had the privilege to host one of the leading lawyers from London, Professor Sibal, and she spent several hours. So thank you, Pavni, for taking time out of your busy schedule in India to be able to visit our campus. But the point I want to say is that the campus has become an ecosystem for deep commitment towards sustainable development. More than 12% of our electricity is now coming through solar power. We've ensured a strong green cover campus. Some of our students who are present here are experiencing that, but the visitors also enjoy that experience. But we've also taken sustainable development towards our courses, our curriculum, and all our pedagogical approach towards learning. We have been very steadfastly committed to raising the quality and standards of excellence. Of course, how do you measure excellence? Well, one of the ways by which excellence has been measured is through rankings. I'm happy to report that just 10 days ago, the QS World University Rankings had published their subject rankings. For the last 7 years, we've been ranked #1 law school in India, and last year we were ranked 78 in the world. This year, our law school has been ranked once again for the 7th year, #1 in India, overtaking all NLSs and other institutions, including my alma mater, Delhi University. But we have been ranked 35 in the world. We jumped from 78 in the world to 35 in the world this year in the QS rankings. Not only the law school, which was our first school, but we also, our School of International Affairs has been ranked 90th in the world. Our business school, after our AACSB accreditation, has become one of the top 200 business schools in the world. Our humanities and social sciences, our economics program, all our schools are now among the top 500 in the world and ranked #1 in India as well. In addition to these global rankings, I'm also happy to report that some years ago, the Honorable Prime Minister of India announced a major public policy initiative in the context of recognizing that India ought to have institutions of eminence. The budgetary outlay for that was announced by Mr. Arun Jaitley, our former finance minister, and the vision was to identify 10 public universities and 10 private universities and give them the status of an institution of eminence. A very elaborate process was conceived and implemented, and I'm happy to report that 8 public universities, 6 of them IITs and 2 central universities, in addition to 4 private universities, were declared and recognized as an institution of eminence. We are one among them, not only being among the youngest, but also we are the only non-STEM, non-medicine university that has been recognized as an institution of eminence. In many ways, this was a very important recognition that we were able to obtain through that process. This is only an encouragement and a support system for us to recommit ourselves to pursuing excellence as a central aspect of our institutional governance. I want to end by saying that each of our schools are growing in their own right, and that is part of our effort. Lastly, I want to quickly tell you that we've established India's first Constitution Museum on our campus, and I hope you will visit us. We had the privilege to establish this museum as a part of our 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Constitution of India on 24th November 2024. We've also established a world-class sports academy, all of which are more recent developments. Just last year in November, we established the world's largest moot court as a part of what is known as International Mooting Academy, including for advocacy, negotiation, dispute adjudication, arbitration, and resolution. We had the Honorable Chief Justice of India, along with 13 sitting Supreme Court judges, the law minister, as well as many others individuals. We literally enacted the Keshwanta Bharti case with the presence of the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, and two other distinguished senior counsels. It was a remarkable moment when we were able to literally reenact. Yes, we have Mr. William Dalrymple right here. Thank you, Mr. Dalrymple, for your presence. So that was a very important moment for us in the university to be able to establish this. These are the actual photographs of the world's largest moot court. I must say that these are not artificial intelligence generated pictures. These are actual photographs of the moot court. It is a 634-seater moot court which has been established at our university. These are our arbitration rooms and mediation centers, as well as our judges' lounge. We also established what is known as the Shalu Jindal Performing Arts Academy, which also became a center of excellence now with a strong commitment to cultural imagination, including performing arts as well. All right, what's our future? Well, we are at the cusp of entering into science and technology education. We hope to build the Jindal International Science and Technology Academy and 10 new schools, including a School of Engineering and Technology, AI and Robotics, Data Sciences, Natural Sciences, Biotechnology and Biomolecular Sciences, followed by a medical school, a School of Dentistry, Nursing, Physiotherapy, as well as Pharmacy. We intend to double the strength of our university, but also the land, the buildings, the courses, the programs, the students, the faculty, the staff, as well as the centers, and that is part of our 10-year strategic agenda. That's my last slide, which is that our mission is to build the future of India and the future of the world. Our vision is to be a world-class university creating global leaders. Our core values include to have an impact on what we do, to promote diversity, to foster excellence, to protect academic freedom, and to advance sustainability. These are our 5 core values, as it is called ideas. All right, I want to, in closing, say that this event was very special for us because it was a student initiative I mentioned. As we announced this event, 2 important criticisms have come up in the public domain, and I want to make a reference to both of them. One criticism was about the fact that all speakers and most others who are part of the panel are men, and hence we have been insensitive about the pluralistic nature of our conversations that we ought to undertake. I must say that we could have done better, and I will exhort our student society to be mindful of the fact that we need to ensure that our panels and our academic endeavors reflect the diversity and plurality that we are deeply committed to. In fact, all our conferences and panel discussions that we have indeed been committed to it, and this initiative should have been no exception to that. The second criticism is a bit unfair one, which is that the criticism was that none of the speakers are, quote unquote, they are not historians, and the fact that they have been invited doesn't reflect the fact that we don't have historians here. I find it a bit unfair criticism simply because of the fact that history and any form of attempt to study history and talk about history should not be limited to only historians. In any case, this was not meant to be a seminar on history, but a conversation surrounding discussions about historical context, but also constitutional values. And hence, these 3 speakers have been outstanding individuals, truly remarkable public intellectuals, whose lifelong contributions to the discussions and the themes that we are covering are quite appropriate. And hence, I believe we did the right thing by inviting these 3 wonderful people. I want to congratulate our students for doing that.
I would like to thank Professor Dr. Raj Kumar, Vice Chancellor OP Jindal Global Law University, for this thoughtful welcome remarks and for setting the tone of the evening. His words underscore the role of institutions as a space of dialogue, inquiry, and a meaningful intellectual engagement. It is in this very spirit of the Jindal Society for Modern Indian Histories that has been envisioned as a platform for reasoned, rigorous, and plural conversations on our past and its continuing relevance. And as stated earlier, with the vision and the spirit of bringing about a platform for multiple conversations on the past and its continuing relevance, with this vision in mind, I invite upon the stage the founding president of the society, Mr. Bava Sayan Bajaj, to introduce the society.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. Thank you so much, Professor Raj, for those remarks. Welcome, Dr. Tharoor. So good to see you, as also you, Mr. Sibal and Mr. Dalrymple. Thank you so much for placing your faith in us and being here. Distinguished guests of honor, lawyers, law students, scholars, members of the faculty, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen. We live in an age in which politics and public discourse play out as much in the past as in the present, with history having become a battlefield on which ceaselessly clash and clang ideologies and ideas. While contestations over matters historic are an inevitable feature of democracies, they must be conducted within the four corners of the founding document without undermining its spirit. For us, that is the Constitution of India, whose spirit must be deferred to even amidst the most perfervid disputes over our understanding of India. But what if, through these contestations, we begin to dispute that very spirit, the terra firma upon which our republic stands, such that there remains no clarity about who we are as citizens or about the direction in which we must steer our nation? That is the risk we run when we distort the history that shaped our constitution. We dismantle the rearview mirror of our democratic vehicle. The politicization of history may well be inevitable, for history has forever been the handmaiden of all political endeavor. But it ought not to come at the cost of our nation's founding values. Our past must not be allowed to divide and diminish us. Instead, it must nurture and nourish us. As Dr. B.R. Ambedkar observed, fraternity remains the most difficult aspiration to attain. Without it, little else is possible. The more divided our history, the lower our chances of attaining fraternity. The foundational objective of the Jindal Society for Modern Indian Histories is rectificatory, to facilitate, through dialogue and deliberation, anchored in research and reason, the restoration of Indian political and public discourse to the middle path of constitutional clarity, and to strive to re-establish that deeply humane consensus anchored in our constitutional values of pluralism and progress. Today, what our higher educational institutions lack is a rigorous, free, and non-partisan platform on which searing questions of national and historical importance may be debated. A platform that brings together historians, social scientists, constitutional scholars, and practitioners to engage in dialogue that cuts through the clutter and establishes facts with clarity and objectivity, building up, in the process, a digital repository of scholarship on modern Indian history, a platform that professes allegiance not to a creed, but to the values set forth in the preamble to the Constitution of India. Instead of being a society for modern Indian history, here is one for modern Indian histories. Why? Because, as Dr. Shashi Tharoor once wrote, the singular thing about India is that you can only speak of it in the plural. Across the teeming panorama of our immemorial history, all praiseworthy Indian monarchs and leaders have realized that even as the people of India speak in different voices, infused with the cadences of nearly every religion known to humanity and countless languages, 22 as recognized in the 8th schedule to the Constitution of India, complete with 22 distinct scripts, they essentially strive towards the same goals, the same desire for a better, more dignified, and a more prosperous life, which individuals like Mr. Sibal have defended in court. So while our words may be uttered in different languages and our modes of prayer may be different, our hearts beat to the same tune, to that of Indianness, to that of being Bharatiya or Hindustani. Our commitment to multiplicity, syncretism, and the synthesis of different peoples and cultures, the most enduring motive of the Indian civilization, finds expression in our motto, one nation, countless pasts. This reflects the essence of the constitutional idea of India, which imposes on us no single faith, language, or culture, but encourages us to embrace our differences even as we revel in our unity. Accordingly, the society seeks to foreground multiple perspectives on historical issues, conditioned only on their being grounded in research and reason. In this regard, the society draws inspiration from Anekantvad, the Jain doctrine that reality is inherently many-sided and cannot be fully captured by any single claim. The parable of the 6 blind men and the elephants reminds us that each perspective may be valid, yet incomplete. Anekantvad thus offers us not relativism, but a disciplined, dogged pluralism, urging restraint, dialogue, and openness in the pursuit of understanding one another and the nation we together inhabit. Accordingly, the society's crest features at its heart the six blind men and the elephant, which is the symbol of Anikantwad, while the four lions above are drawn from Professor Gopal Krishna Gandhi's metaphor of the fourth lion. When seen as a two-dimensional illustration, our national emblem, the Ashoka Stamp, seems only to have three lions, the three visible to the naked eye. There is, however, a fourth lion at the back, reflective of the unseen, marginalized India. It is this India that the Society seeks to foreground as well, alongside bringing to light forgotten and neglected chapters of our modern history, crucial to understanding contemporary India. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I present before you the Jindal Society for Modern Indian Histories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear audience. Good evening to everybody present here. It's an absolute honor to be part of this panel. Very good evening, Mr. Dalrymple. Very good evening, Dr. Tharoor. Very good evening, Mr. Sibal. I'm Arup K. Chatterjee, Professor of English. And my first question to you, Mr. Sibal and Dr. Tharoor, in the opening round is as follows, sir. Both of you have engaged with India as a constitutional democracy in multiple capacities, as public intellectuals, constitutional practitioners, and having served as union ministers, as members of both the Treasury and opposition benches of the Parliament. Throughout, the founding constitutional values of India, that is Bharat, deference to rule of law, democratic accountability, secularism, and so on, have been the articles of your faith. How do you see the relationship between the nation's history and the vitality of its democratic institutions, sir? And does the relationship, in your experience, run differently through generations that forged independence and those that have inherited it?
If you really look at India, my understanding of history convinces me that the Constitution as it was framed is based on historical values that we inherited from those who fought for freedom, right? And those values then are enshrined in our Constitution. Now, there's a symbiotic relationship between history and democratic institutions in the context of our freedom struggle. History provides the grammar, and democratic institutions provide the syntax. If you destroy the grammar, everything will be diminished. Our institutional values will be diminished. But history also teaches us that, especially when I came, my family came, suffered during the partition, lost some of members of my family. And my parents saw the pain, the killing, the dance of violence on the streets. It taught them as to how we need to unite together as a nation to ensure that things like this never happen again. And that too is a lesson that we learn from history. So I think that it's important, and the very concept of our constitutional values is enshrined in the Constitution and in the preamble, and in the various articles of equality, fraternity, the directive principles of state policy. They're all related to where we were and where we want to be. And where we were is history, where we want to be is the future, and you can't know where you want to be till you understand history, and in the present, understand what your roadmap should be.
I agree completely with Kapil. It's almost impossible to say anything differently on this. Other than that, as a student of history myself, I often saw the process of engaging with history as something that our founding fathers also, our founding fathers and mothers, undertook when they were preparing the Constitution that you're talking about today. In the sense that the Constitution didn't spring out of anywhere. The whole process of creating India's democracy didn't spring out of nothing. It was an interrogation of the past. It was, of course, a conscious attempt to revive and be inspired by elements in our historical past, while at the same time trying to find meaning in them for the future. And as Kapil said, I mean, essentially, the past had to inform the struggles of the present. And any nation that, any democracy that forgets the struggles that shaped it, which means it forgets the history that led to it, isn't worthy of the name. So I think That consciousness of history is indispensable even to what we are today, what we are fighting to preserve, what we are fighting to transcend. History also has iniquities, injustices, various other things we want to overcome, and our democracy is supposed to be an instrument of transformation as well. History is not only a source of inspiration, it also shows you the negatives you want to change. And I would argue that our democracy is very much engaged in this process of interrogating the past, celebrating what can be celebrated from it, reinventing what can be reinvented and challenged, and perhaps rejecting some things from the past that are no longer appropriate for us. I mean, untouchability is a great example. Things like that which are embedded in the Constitution and in our democracy as well. So it's an ongoing process, and what is, of course, news today will be history tomorrow. But history informs everything, I believe, that we are living with today.
Thank you so much for those very, very deep, insightful remarks, sirs. My next question is for Mr. Dalrymple. Mr. Dalrymple, sir, you've written that when you first arrived in Delhi as an 18-year-old on a foggy winter's night on 26 January 1984, you knew nothing at all about India. Having spent your childhood in rural Scotland along the shores of Firth or Forth, India must have been another world altogether, widely and wildly different from where you hailed. But you not only stayed on, you built a life here. What made you do it? Was it the people? Was it the history? Was it the culture? And over the course of many decades that you've spent in India, exploring and examining its history as much as its present, in what ways do you reckon the past confronts the present, and does it ever leave us alone?
Lovely questions. I would agree with my fellow panelists that you can't understand where you are without knowing how you've got here. History is like a map. If you're just placed down, dropped from the air somewhere without a map, you can't find your way. And the same is true of understanding the world around us. If you don't know how we've got here, if you don't understand the various stages in India's history, you can't possibly understand the politics. And I think there are places in this earth where history is more live than in other places. Where I come from, the great struggles over 500 or 600 years were the battles between Catholics and Protestants. That has almost died now. There are bits of Northern Ireland where it still can possibly swing a local election, but it's not a live issue that forms everyday life. But what we're seeing in the Middle East now, and what we saw in India last summer, and the skirmish or war with Pakistan that's dropped, comes directly out of a complicated past that you need to understand and need to have the nuance to understand it. I actually, by chance, spent the morning reading a proof of an extraordinary new book, which is by a wonderful historian called Munis Faruqi, who spent 30 years reading every sanad, every firman, every, here's the publisher, I'm just talking about Munis's book. And 30 years of labor in archives to help understand the nuances of history, which is so easily reduced to sound bites and political point scoring and so on. History really can teach you, as this book, which will, I'm sure, be an enormous sensation next year when it's published, because it completely changes our understanding of that very, very sensitive and contested and polarizing era of history. History can help you understand how you've been here. As for how I got here, the other part of your question, I just love it here. I mean, I know it's an eccentric view, particularly in Delhi, where poor Shashi is wearing an air purifier around his neck. And we all know that there are many reasons to be irritated and upset by various aspects of this city, but it's still a place I've chosen to live for over 40 years. There are no plans to leave. Simply, and you asked, was it the history? Was it the people? Is it the food? Is it the climate? Well, it's not the air, but it is a combination of all the others. I think it's still as wonderful a city and as wonderful a country as anywhere in the world, and I have no plans to leave.
I just want to, another dimension of this needs to be addressed, and that is that there is a contrition, there is a kind of struggle going on within the system in respect of our past and our present. So if we want to address the issue of the future, we need to dismantle the imperialist structures of the past, right? Because we aspired for European values. Remember, we came out of a colonial past where the struggle for freedom then resulted in values of liberalism which need to be protected. And that's how democracy was embraced. But democracy as an institution is a very fragile institution. Being a fragile institution, you need to be very careful to protect it.
Actually, if I could add to that, since Kapil mentioned imperialism, having written a book about the impact of British colonialism on India, one of the things I used to find myself saying, I find William echoing the same thought. When I talked about the book to young audiences, I'd always tell them that if you don't know where you're coming from, how would you appreciate where you're going? And in many ways, what Kapil has just said underscores that message even for other generations.
Well, on the question of what I think we call the bureaucratic state, sir, I would like to ask a question of Mr. Dalrymple, in line with what you were just saying, Mr. Sibal. Mr. Dalrymple, in The White Mughals, you make the compelling case that the East India Company, like the Indo-Greeks, the Delhi Sultans, and the Mughals before them, initially embraced India's culture and traditions with remarkable ease. Its officials learned Persian, married Indian women, raised Anglo-Indian children, and participated in Mughal manners. However, you demonstrate that as this cultural assimilation was underway, the company remained at its core a commercial enterprise. And as Burke has called, it was a state in the disguise of a merchant. Dr. Tharoor, among others, has commented on the figure that $45 trillion was siphoned from India. The question is, sir, to what extent did this colonial model shape the shambolic economy that India's founders inherited? What role would you say this may have played in producing a generation of leaders haunted by the memory of colonial exploitation, resulting in a dogged commitment to self-sufficiency?
Very good questions. So yes, the nature of colonial rule changed very dramatically in the course of 300 years. People often talk about the colonial project as if it was one thing, but its nature changes very dramatically within that time. Most dramatically, the change from the East India Company to the Raj, from being controlled, India being controlled by a commercial company with a share price, with an annual general meeting, with all the trappings of a business like Google or Facebook or Meta or one of these, ExxonMobil, one of these enormous corporations. And the extraordinary fact that we often forget that behind all the events we read about in history, whether it's the Battle of Plassey or the Battle of Buxar or balls at Government House or enormous durbars and so on, behind all this, like heartbeat, the share price of this company is going up and down. And the only reason for that company to exist is to make a profit for its shareholders, like any corporation. At that period of history, it was profitable for it was most profitable for the company to come to this country, which made the finest textiles in the world. When people think of the Mughals in this country, they tend to think of Bollywood images of Hrithik Roshan and Aishwarya Rai dropping mangoes into each other's mouths and so on. What they forget is that that wealth, that splendor that created the Taj and the Red Forts and so on, is built on a solid economic basis, which came largely from the manufacture of textiles in the 18th century. And that 1 million looms in Bengal created the most competitive industrial complex in the world. It's one of the rare moments of history when the area of India produces more GDP than the area of China, although neither states obviously exactly existed on the same boundaries. But the 18th century is one of the rare moments in Indian history when India is basically producing more riches than India, and the reason it's doing it is textiles. So it suits the profitability of the East India Company to come here, buy Indian goods cheaply, and ship it around the world, because the Mughals, being a Central Asian power, did not really have a navy. And there was an opening for a commercial company to ship this stuff. By the late 18th century, there's deindustrialization as far away as Mexico, because the cloth produced, just a simple piece of cotton cloth, forget all the fancy silks, the kalamkaris, the beautiful everything that you see hanging from bedspreads in gorgeous bedrooms in Venice or Florence or anything. Just a simple piece of cotton produced in Bengali looms was so competitive that there's deindustrialization in Mexico, because the Brits are successfully selling this stuff that they're buying cheaply. By the late 19th century, there's a completely different commercial situation, in that the Brits, through slavery, have created this horrific gulag in the Caribbean that's producing incredibly cheap cotton, which is then being milled industrially in Manchester and the north of England. And therefore, it is profitable to sell that to India. So it's a completely different economic model. Also, you have what we always forget, that by this stage, the most profitable thing that India is producing is actually opium, and that the Brits have turned into the largest narco operators in history, making Pablo Escobar look like Andy Pandy or bananas and pajamas. And these combined, it's a completely different model. So a long answer to say that it's many different things, and that the white Mughals who were able to make a life here did so, exploiting as enthusiastically as anyone else, and it was there always for profit at the end of the day. However much they might have appreciated the culture and translated the Ashoka inscriptions and all the rest of it, they were here to make a profit, and the nature of that profit changed as time went on.
My next question is for Mr. Sibal, you, sir, and that will be followed by a question for Dr. Tharoor. So I'll keep my following two questions brief. First to Mr. Sibal, of course. Mr. Sibal, sir, just as the British, the East India Company, I mean, reinterpreted its own liberal policies to become rather corrupt, the Constitution can also be, as you have very rightly said, interpreted in many different ways, not always desirable. Now, Dr. Ambedkar warned that constitutional morality was not a natural sentiment. It had to be cultivated. Ambedkar's darker fear was that it was perfectly possible to pervert a constitution without changing its form, by merely changing the form of its administration. Do you have any thoughts on that, sir?
Well, you know, Ambedkar also said you can have whatever constitution you want. Can be a perfect constitution when you read it. But the fact of the matter is, who are the men who govern it? That's the question. And Ambedkar said that, in fact, this constitution is not going to deliver unless the social structures of this country change. And there's a revolution within those social structures. Now, unfortunately, those social structures are getting embedded into our social system far more strongly than ever were before, quite frankly. Now, the whole purpose of our constitution was to get rid of majoritarianism. The whole content, if you look at the various articles of the constitution, was to ensure that the diversity of India must be protected, which is why you had 29, 30 which is why you had the clauses relating to scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, which you had the concept of directive principle of state policy, saying that the economic wealth of the economic resources of the country should not be distributed to a few. That encapsulated the dreams of our forefathers, and constitutional morality was to ensure that the courts protected that constitutional morality. Right? That's what courts are there for.
For Dr. Tharoor, in the 19th century, there was a very strong group of Indians, 19th, you can go back to the 13th and the 14th centuries as well, who stood up to tradition, and the tradition of perhaps their own nation. And Dr. Tharoor has said, very vociferously, that instead of colonialism, it was the socio-religious reform movements led by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Jyotiba Phule, Savitri Phule, and many others, that gave India its modernity and modernization. Dr. Tharoor has also written on Sri Narayan Guru, a reformer from Kerala. Without going on too much with the question, I would just like for our esteemed guest here to perhaps try and reiterate a few of the most illuminating points from 19th century social reform movements, and sir, if there is any chance of their resurgence in the modern era.
See, the thing about the 19th century reform movements, they really were a very interesting way of interrogating the modernity that was being thrust upon us. And if you look at the way in which the Indian reformers both derived a lot of inspiration and ideas from traditions, including ancient scriptures and so on, and at the same time were forced by the dawning of the Enlightenment and the whole Western liberal thinking that was coming into our country, to also ask if one could be reconciled with the other, you had a very interesting admixture taking place. In fact, if you look at all of them, and Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar are both fascinating examples of people who had been very steeped in traditional scholarship. In the case of Ram Mohan Roy, he studied Sanskrit, he studied Persian, he studied Arabic, he studied everything as well as English and Bengali. And Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, in for example, calling for widow remarriage, actually went back into the Puranas, went back into the ancient texts, found examples in the Samhitas to be able to cite, to say that these are not authentic Hindu practices, they are later barbarisms that have come in. Same with Roy, who said that a lot of what has come in as modern Hinduism is actually a betrayal of the purest Vedic originals. And of course, as you know, he ended up with Brahmo Samaj and a very sort of westernized form of Hinduism, some would say. But be that as it may, all of these were ways in which you could take Western modernity, ancient India, and create a new Indian form of response. In fact, you could even go beyond that, because if you look at the Phules, Jyotiba Phule's book actually looked at Hinduism through the prism of the American liberation of the slaves, which is a fascinating analogy. Take someone like Derozio, who created the whole Young Bengal movement, and who is born into a family that's partly Bengali, partly Portuguese, and produces this extraordinary brilliance in terms of his own interpretations of where young Indians needed to go in the early 19th century. And he dies at 22, by the way, which is something that really boggles the mind, having already made a profound impact on the intellectual history of India at that age. And then you go on from there, there's so many more examples, we can go on forever. By the time you get to the late 19th century, you've got all the reformers within Hinduism, like Sri Narayana Guru and many others, particularly Dayanand Saraswati is one. There are so many examples one can find. I don't want to pick some, it'll be invidious. You've got a modern judge like Justice Ranade, who actually, having been trained in Western jurisprudence, applies some of those principles to an awakening of Indian consciousness. And of course, Ambedkar, Gokhale first started off as a disciple of Ranade and then came up with his own very, very sort of modern liberal constitutionalism, which marks a transition to the 20th century. But I've forgotten where your question took us, Professor Chatterjee. You asked about the 19th century and this kind of modernity. I mean, basically my argument would be that a lot of Indian intellectual innovation in the 19th century was not purely, it certainly wasn't derivative from the British colonial impositions and British Western ideas. It was partly a reaction to them, partly an attempt to assimilate them into an Indian framework, partly an attempt to combat them through a process of, if you like, miscegenation with ancient Indian tradition, scripture, and doctrine, all of which had to be relevant to a society that perhaps a Western frame allowed these Indian reformers to see as basically flawed in crucial respects. Whether it was Ram Mohan Roy's trouble, being bothered about idol worship, or Sati, or Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar advocating against Sati and four-widow remarriage, they were also interrogating and challenging things that were wrong in our society, and maybe they saw them as wrong initially because the Westerners who are now ruling us were sneering at them, but they did not accept the Western frame. They looked to Indian sources and Indian traditions and Indian texts to justify their desire to promote change. And so out of all this ferment, you get a very Indian modernity, a very Indian approach to what the then 19th century demanded of transformative young Indians. And of course, by the 20th century, this morphs into the nationalist movement. So you've got this whole thing going. But you asked about the 19th, I'll stick to that.
But the problem there is that all this is contextual. Remember, all reform takes place in a context, given the nature of the society as it then exists. And your question was, can we see that kind of reform in the 21st century?
Okay, I beg your pardon.
Right, that's the question that he asked. And the question is, the context has changed. The nature of the polity has changed. Commerce takes over everything else. Consumerism is part of everyday life. So the reformation that is going to take place in the future, it will be reforming in the context of the nature of our global economy, in the context in which it affects people around the world. That's the kind of, and that has impact on societies. So the reformation in the 21st century will only be in that context, not in the context of the 19th century.
Had I been a historian, Mr. Sibal, I would have called that the episteme, or what John Kuhn called paradigm, but I'm a professor of English. I will like to take the thread from your comment, Mr. Sibal, and try and see what India was doing at a time when the context belonged to India. Mr. Dalrymple, you write in The Golden Road that ancient India was not an isolated backwater. It was deeply connected with the West, the East. It dominated significant parts of Southeast Asia. And you also speak very eloquently about India's free speech laboratories, Nalanda, Takshashila, and so on. In other words, can knowledge of the Golden Road, both your book, of course, and the phenomenon called the Golden Road, help counter the claim that democracy is a Western import into India? I think Dr. Ambedkar might have also asked you a similar question because he spoke about this in his last Constituent Assembly speech.
I think one of the extraordinary examples of how to promote a country and its learning can be seen in the way that the Chinese have created this story of the Silk Road. Everyone, I think, today assumes that it's something that's always been there. That if we'd been here at the time of Nehru or Ambedkar, the people would have known what the Silk Road was. They didn't. The Silk Road was an idea that first appears in 1877 in a German colonial book called Die Seidenstraßen by a guy called Baron von Richthofen. It didn't appear in the English language at all until 1936 when somebody called Sven Hedin writes a travel book called, it's translated into English as The Silk Road. And it's only in the 1980s that this idea begins to percolate. There's an exhibition at the Met in New York, and then the following year in the National Gallery in Washington. That kicks it off. But the Chinese take this idea, and they create something real out of something which never actually properly existed. There was never a motorway running from east to west. And if you read, even those who came across it, like Xuanzang, he gets nearly murdered 5 or 6 times on the course of doing this, because it's a very difficult passage. Yet, Xi Jinping and his predecessors have built something that is actually there now, which is the Belt and Road, on the basis of this historical idea that has become now a reality. And it has created universally around the world, in those 2 words, Silk Road, immediately bring to life an entire world: camels crossing sand dunes, saddlebags full of spices. It works at the level of the Netflix drama with Marco Polo and beautiful Mongol princesses. It works at the level of the university seminar, and we have a university Silk Route studies centers now in universities around the world. And it works at the level of geopolitics, and Xi Jinping has created something out of this idea. But this idea, which is a creation and an intellectual construct that's very recent, completely marginalizes India, which, if you look at early classical history, was far more influential than China. China was always more isolated throughout history than India. India's position between East and West. In the classical period, it was only 6 weeks sailing away from Roman Egypt. If you got into a boat in the monsoon, you could be from the coast of, from Shashi's constituency, you could be on the Red Sea in 6 weeks with the monsoon winds behind you. And these regular sailings involved fleets of 250, 500 vessels at a time, passing from Muziris to Berenike and back again. And Pliny says very clearly that India is the drain of all the precious metals in the world. It was the anxiety which led the Romans to, wait for it, put 30% tariffs up on the Red Sea coast. This has happened since the book came out, and I hope I didn't in any way influence anything, because this was there, and it produced enormous wealth for the Roman Empire. In fact, it produced, some economic historians say, as much as a quarter of the Roman imperial budget, the Red Sea import tariffs, because coming in there were ivory, silks, and it was in, if you look at the Roman guides, they get their silk not from China, but from Gujarat. That is where Roman sailors got and muslins, all these things were brought from India. And India eastwards sends the ideas of both Buddhism and then a little bit later Hinduism, so that by the time of the 7th century, the Emperor's Wu Zetian, China has taken on an Indian religion as its court state religion. And then a little bit later, with the whole growth of Sanskrit literature as a vernacular language in use as an international diplomatic language, not just as a language of the temple, you have a period when Sanskrit becomes what French would be in the 19th century, what English is today, the diplomatic language all the way from Kandahar to Bali. This is completely forgotten in British historiography, and the likes of Mill and so on simply are ignorant of this period. And today, India has not done a good job in putting this idea out. People do not know out there in Europe or in America that the numbers that they use every day are numbers which were dreamt up. The digits on every mobile phone, on every laptop, everywhere in the world is developed in this country and spreads via the Arab world to the West, and only gets to Europe by the 12th century. And the person who brings it is a kid who's brought up in the Arab world, who's called Fibonacci. It's Fibonacci that brings this to Europe. So I think India could do a much better job in telling its history. You referred, sir, in your introduction to the criticisms that have been leveled. I think there is the reason this criticism was not so much the absence of women from this panel, but the other criticisms. There is a feeling in university departments in this country that they are under a siege, that they are under assault. There is a deep sensitivity that people do not appreciate academic history, that is not taken seriously, that it's under attack. And I think there is so much work that societies like this can do to spread the reading and the study of history. To just, if history could only be promoted in the way that this society plans to do, what a story there is to tell of the history of this country.
I could listen to that over and over again, and I'm sure the audience would love that too. I hate to announce it to the audience that we have come to the very end of this extraordinary panel discussion. There is one last question left, which I would like to pose to all three of you, sirs. And this is, modern Indian history contains within its stories of remarkable democratic renewal alongside episodes of democratic regression. Looking at that full record, what gives you genuine confidence, if anything does, that the constitutional values on which this republic was founded have roots deep enough to endure the pressures they may face from time to time, as most liberal democracies across the globe have faced? And what, in your view, does a society like the one we are inaugurating this evening, committed to rigorous and non-partisan historical inquiry, actually going to be able to contribute to such a project? Mr. Dalrymple, to some extent, has already touched on an answer, but I would love for Mr. Kapil and Dr. Tharoor to shed their insights, please.
The democratic values of any nation can only be protected through a judicial system which is independent. And when you talk of independence, and I mean independent of every individual, a judge sitting on that bench has a bias. He has an individual bias, and you can't sort of question him on that. But when it comes to political issues, issues that impact the future of our country, he must get rid of that. If Parliament chooses not to debate issues, if Parliament chooses not to have a conversation, if courts choose not to uphold democratic values, then I'm afraid that the road that we are taking ahead is full of danger. And I think that civil society is also responsible. And if you fill those academic institutions with political functionaries or with a particular ideology, then the kind of course that you want to, or the kind of information, the kind of wealth of knowledge that we have, that we want to in fact teach in your university, may be an isolated instance.
I think one of the things we are in danger of forgetting in the obsession with the immediate, with today's inbox and the breaking news culture and what's, really flipping by our screens as we scan them, as we scroll through them. What we're missing is that sense of history, the sense of how we came to have what we have. And I'm not a fan of the parliamentary system. I'm very much a fan of diversity and pluralism being respected in our politics, but I genuinely am an old Montesquieu fan, a believer in a complete and absolute separation of the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And I think the big flaw in the parliamentary system that we've seen repeatedly in our country is when the executive is formed out of the legislature and commands it, the legislature ceases to be an independent entity in any meaningful sense. But that's another philosophical conversation we can have. But just understanding the history why we got there, the answer to this particular riddle is because the Indians thought that anything the British were denying them had to be worth having. And so we fought to have the parliamentary system because the British didn't want us to have it. And let's face it, Clement Attlee actually came here with the Simon Commission and recommended a presidential system for the Indian social reality, which actually would have made a lot of sense, a completely independent legislature. I think so. And I'll tell you why. Because in a genuinely democratic presidential system, the legislature is able to exact accountability from the executive, because it is neither is the executive vulnerable to the majority or lack thereof of the legislature, nor is the legislature subject to the disciplining body. He ended up by asking whether this kind of society is being formed. And I wanted to end with a very strong endorsement of it. Sayan Bajaj, who came up with this idea and is the first president of the society, was an intern of mine. And I've seen him, he's a very, very bright young man who reads history assiduously and passionately, even though the poor man is studying to be a lawyer like you. He actually is immersed in history. And at the same time, he writes very well, and I think he articulates a lot of the ideas that will matter, that a Kapil Sibal of the future, of his generation, needs to be able to engage with. And I'm glad that the Kapil Sibals of the future are not only the ones taking large fees and paying record tax. I don't mean Kapil does a lot of pro bono work. I mean that a lot of the legal profession is very much mired in the consumerist culture he was bemoaning. He's not. But I'm just saying that a lot of them are, and I'm glad there will be future lawyers like Babasai and Bajaj, who's immersed in history and an awareness of historical past and practice. And you and your colleagues have done a wonderful thing in creating the society. Even naming it the way you've done, I rather like. Histories in plural. Very much the awareness that my history may not look quite the same as yours. And I love the logo. I think that you've explained it very well, so congratulations on doing that in your remarks. I think a society like this will have a very, very great value, especially to people in fields like law and business and some of the other subjects that Jindal teaches, where you might otherwise find yourself disconnected as a student from history, from the past, from these ideas that have shaped our present and hopefully might still be resurrected in the future. But I do feel optimism. I mean, nothing could have been a more devastating blow to Indian democracy than the emergency, when half of Parliament was in jail for a while, when the media was completely and officially censored, when blank spaces had to appear in one day's papers, and the next day the censors declared that even blank spaces were not permissible. You had to fill them up with whatever you could, but you had to. I mean, that was a complete and dramatic loss of the freedoms that our founders had fought for, and yet we came out of it. The constitutional values had somehow been sufficiently deeply internalized that our system was able to correct itself.
And the universities are one of the key institutions in any country to educate freely, to speak freely, to teach independence of mind. So what you do at Jindal and how you navigate the choppy waters that undoubtedly will be ahead is crucially important. And never underestimate the value of the education you give and the values you give, and the necessity to teach your kids to critically judge and stand up for the democracy that they have.
So in other words, you're all happily blessing your new society.
All right, I just want to quickly respond to some of these amazing comments. First of all, William, thank you for those comments, and I think 17 years of institutional building has indeed taught us many lessons, navigating the complex issues surrounding history and context, as Mr. Sibal talked about. We are also very fortunate that our benefactor, Mr. Jindal, has ensured that academic freedom and autonomy in institutional governance becomes the foundation for our institutional building. And Shashi, on a lighter note, the real question is not why Baba is becoming a lawyer. The real question that you need to ask is that why you didn't become one. Because Dr. Ambedkar was a lawyer, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was a lawyer, Sardar Patel was a lawyer, Nehru was a lawyer, Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer. Every major figure who fought our freedom movement happened to be lawyers. So Kapil Sibal and others were part of that illustrious journey of lawyers. So you ought to have become a lawyer. My larger question to... My larger...
Give him example. Prakash Narayan was not a lawyer.
Yes, yes. One question to all of you is that, and
He studied law at Kanpur.
Who's that?
Vajpayee.
But he never practiced, did he?
I know.
He never practiced.
But he didn't take a degree. in law.
so my question to all of you is that I was appointed as Vice Chancellor at 34.
Despite having a law degree.
Yes, but my point is that whenever I am part of these forums, including the one now, I also hear, and I respect Mr. Sibal a lot, a sense of despair too about the future because of the contemporary things that happen around. But I'm also conscious that now I'm 50, and the three of you are, I don't want to tell you age, but you're definitely not, you're north of 50. We are a country of 1.5 billion people. 1 billion of them are less than 35 years of age. All of them are much younger than all of us. Our life expectancy at the dawn of independence was 32, and now it is 72 and expected to move into 80s. My question to all of you is that, what is the hope that we're going to give to the young people of India? What is it that we want to tell them as they navigate this complex society around them in India and around them in the world, so that they don't leave their ideas with despair, but they end up having more hope and optimism for the future, so that they can become a change to build a better future?
Okay, let me just try and answer that. Quite frankly, you're talking about this demographic dividend. And this, what William said was absolutely right. This demographic dividend can only be empowered if you provide them quality education, right? Now, I've been HRD minister, I've gone all over the country, looked at all the schools. And the fact of the matter is there are no teachers there. And the university system, you are now have ad hoc teachers. I mean, we're not talking about Jindal. Ad hoc teachers who are paid 50,000 rupees and they are teaching in universities. So in the absence of a strong reformative education system where the government says, you know, a hands-off government with quality teachers, that's the foundation and the building block of any society. Why is Iran where it is today? Despite the fact that it's in the midst of this chaos, they're the most educated people in that part of the world. A civilization based on quality education is the future of any country. Look at the United States of America. The R&D expenditure in the US is $850 billion a year. Well, government gives grants to universities, right? And private sector comes in, uses those grants to do R&D. China is $650 billion. India is $80 billion. So you have to have academic freedom. The under 35 people who will not be empowered unless you allow institutions to flourish. And this is one sector of the economy that needs to be given complete freedom. Because remember, your GDP is built on ideas. Ideas emerge out of the university system. Private sector uses those ideas to make goods and sell services. In the absence of ideas, there will be neither goods nor services. There will be imports.
No, I mean, problem is with Kapil, I agree almost all the time. So it's very difficult to just, I don't want to repeat. The maximum that you can push the envelope, the better it will be for your charges, for the kids you're going to produce, and I hope you will. But universities, the media, the judiciary, all are institutions which, to a greater or lesser degree, in some at different times lesser than others, have been compromised by the pressures under which they're functioning, and that is something that worries me. But I still don't believe that any of this can be permanent. Right? Just as we saw the revival, I mean, the media was censored, and look how it came back immediately after the emergency. I do believe that there will be opportunities to assert ourselves in various aspects of our country. And one of the things that you will produce through educated students with a consciousness of all of these values of history and everything else is perhaps a stronger civic society that will, in the end, resist the encroachments of the political class. Let's hope.
I think we've seen there are ample reasons for anxiety about the political future and the need to educate people to defend freedoms. But about India's place in the world, I think there is enormous reasons to be very optimistic. India has been an incredibly rich and an incredibly intellectually vibrant country for almost all of its history. For most of its history, whether we're talking about the time of when the Romans are coming to buy the goods of India in the first century, or whether we're talking about the Mughal period, or whether we're talking about the 18th century, India's produced usually around 40% of the world's GDP. The one period that doesn't happen is the colonial period, when through the military strength of the West, those riches are sucked out, and instead you have lovely country houses being built in England rather than here with the money generated from India. It's taken 75 years, but India is now that natural balance of the world where India and China between them dominate most of the world's productivity and create most of the world's great ideas is coming back to be a reality, and faster than my generation could possibly have imagined. I remember going to China for the first time in 1986. Everyone was wandering around in Mao suits with, Mao blaring out on loudspeakers, all his the little red thoughts coming out. Unimaginable to see what's happened in just a generation, and this process is happening here too. If anyone that can remember back, the more elderly members of the audience, to how things were 30, 40 years ago to the changes we've seen today, and this will continue. And I think as someone with one foot in Europe and one foot here, every year you feel Europe and England and Britain becoming a little more marginal, a little more diminished. Every year you come back here and you feel India and China, between them, more and more central. So I think whatever the dangers politically, the wider picture of India's rise seems to me to be more or less unstoppable.
What a way to end.
Sayan happens to be a former student. I accepted it without fully appreciating what I was agreeing to. Having now sat through this conversation, I find myself in this unenviable position of being the person who speaks after Mr. Sibal has spoken, after Dr. Tharoor has spoken, and after Mr. Dalrymple has spoken. And there's no graceful way to follow that, so I will not try. I will rather try to cover a few things that I think needs to be said. One of the deepest tensions in any democracy is the tension between history and memory. They are not the same thing, though we tend to try and we treat them as if they were. So history is this disciplined, evidence-based attempt to recover and make sense of the past. Memory, on the contrary to history, is something far more selective. Memory is far more interested in the present. Memory is far more susceptible to the demands of whoever happens to be shaping the national narrative at a given moment. The paradox of our age is that access to history has never been greater with the help of technology, yet the distance between history and memory may never have been wider. So if we consider the opening question as well that started our conversation today, whether there is a relationship between a nation's modern history and the vitality of the democratic institutions. So you have nation's modern history on one side and the vitality of the democratic institutions on the other. Do they have a relationship? And the answer, I would submit, is not merely yes, it is that the two are inseparable. And when one is distorted, the other one suffers. And this is something that we have seen over the years as well. So, having practiced law in India and the UK, and I have taught and discussed constitutional law debates for a few years now. I do have like a few students in the audience as well today. So as I tell my students consistently that a constitution is not a self-explanatory document. It does not float free of the history that produced it. The commitments in our preamble, such as secularism, liberty, equality, fraternity, along with the supremacy of the law, and your democratic accountability were not some rhetorical flourishes placed there for decoration. They were conclusions. They were arrived at by people who had seen at close range what happens to a civilization when those commitments are absent. So these commitments were the product of hard-won historical understanding that our Constituent Assembly members shared, when it came to experiences of colonial subjugation, of partition, and followed by long and agonizing negotiations, which we all have access to, like how it was required to build a democratic republic out of a subcontinent that the departing power at that time had spent considerable energy convincing themselves and others around the world that we would not hold together. So when such complex history is simplified or gets contested on terms that have nothing to do with evidence, the constitutional architecture built upon these debates become vulnerable in ways that may not be immediately visible, but are over time deeply corrosive. This evening, one of the conversations touched on a question that Mrs. Sibal addressed, and I want to linger on for just a moment with that. So Dr. Ambedkar, in his address during the Constituent Assembly in 1958 in November, he invoked the phrase constitutional morality, and this is something that I've discussed in my lectures as well in the past. So he borrowed the phrase from the English historian George Grote. So Grote explained the phrase as having this perfect balance wherein he holds this confidence in every citizen amid the bitterness of party conflict or party politics. And that is the possibility to exist, but the values and forms of the Constitution will not be less sacred in the eyes of the opponents than in one's own. And Ambedkar's warning, that was something that was highlighted as well in one of the questions, whilst using the phrase of constitutional morality was actually sober. So constitutional morality, he said, was not a natural settlement. It had to be cultivated. That warning was uttered by him almost 78 years ago. And whether we have honored it, and in the last few decades, that is one of the most important questions that we can ask of our modern history. It is also, as those of us who follow the courts now, and a lot of you are lawyers, law scholars, and people who have been reporting on court, a question that is very much alive today. So I will only say this as someone who professes law, that constitutional morality as a concept was not some vague sentiment, which is unfit for legal reasoning. It was the answer to the question as to what would guard, or who would guard the document against the passions of any given majority. To retire such concept would be to ask the Constitution to make its peace with the very prejudices it was written to get rid of. Now, that is I thought that is worth saying in a room full of lawyers and law students. Our panelists were also asked this evening questions around independence for our nation, if democracy always meant something maybe more than elections. And this is something that we see when Ambedkar and Nehru debated with, over the questions around democracy, and we see that they were clear-eyed about the idea of democracy, even though there were differences. So Ambedkar, although gave a warning that democracy in India was only a top dressing on an essentially undemocratic soil, it was not to be a counsel of despair. It was call for vigilance. And Ambedkar's warning was more of a recognition that formal institutions, like courts could be taken as an example, however brilliantly designed, are only as strong as the habits of the mind that support them. And yet, as our panelists have reminded us this evening, the founders also understood something else. They understood that a nation as plural as this one, with its many languages and religions and historical memories, could not be held together by force or by the imposition of a single narrative. It can only be held together by a constitutional ethos that made room for differences to exist. That said, in effect, you do not have to be the same to belong here. That was a genuinely radical commitment made in 1947. It remains a genuinely radical commitment today. So now does this generation that inherited the Republic understand as viscerally as those who built it what it actually cost us? So that is a question society wants to keep alive as we go ahead, and that is what we are striving for as well. So not in the spirit of nostalgia, but in the spirit of honest reckoning. So the society's symbol, that is something that the president of the society also discussed about, that it's the parable of 6 blind men and the elephant. Every man touches a part and believes he has the whole. The lesson is not that all perspectives are equally valid. The lesson is that no single perspective can exhaust the truth. And that error lies not in what each blind man feels, but in the claim that what he feels is all there is. That is the epistemological foundation of the society, and I believe it is exactly right for this historical moment. The students who built it, who organized this evening with such seriousness and care, have set a standard for themselves. I have every confidence that they will meet it as they go ahead. To our panelists and everyone who joined us today, you have given us an evening that this society will be measured against for a long time. We are grateful. Jai Hind, Jai Samvidhan.
I extend my sincere thanks to Professor Abhishek Rana for his concluding remarks and insightful reflections between constitutional morality and history, of course touching upon the epistemological foundation of the society.